is Dave Chappelle's special. It is called The Closer, okay? And Dave Chappelle, he actually talks about this being one of his last stand-up specials, at least for a while. And in it, he really goes there. He talked about everything from, you know, the blood of trans people being Beetlejuice or beet juice to dirty Ohio white women strippers who use dirt on their feet. He had a lot of range, but a lot of his comments were not taken very well by many in society, and there's actually been, you know, people who've gotten fired at Netflix. There are trans workers who are planning on walking out at Netflix. And it has split the country in half. Dave has a lot of supporters, especially since he started talking about trans folks and LGBTQIA plus folks from his specials over the past, 3 to 4 years. And so this one is where everything sort of came to a head. He talked about, what else he talked about? He talked about this one trans woman who was a friend of his who defended him and got a lot of backlash and ended up, unfortunately, taking her own life. So there are a lot of stories in there. But there's a lot of controversy about it. And T, I want to know what some of your thoughts were.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, and I guess I just want to further reiterate, like, there are large swaths of people calling for this special to be canceled, but Netflix doubled down and said, like, no, this is freedom of expression. And yeah, it resulted in a trans woman. I don't know if she was fired, but I know she was suspended. Because she organized, I think she organized a few people, or just it might have just been her, but she crashed like a Netflix executive meeting. And just like you said, like, there are people, I think on October 20th, planning to like protest. Essentially, they're planning to strike, essentially, if that's the word we're going to use, trans people and their allies, to kind of promote their concerns about like this special, because of its transphobic remarks. But when it came to this, bro, I'm not gonna lie. I knew we had to talk about it, but I didn't know exactly how to talk about it. Like, it
Yeah.
was so controversial. I didn't really know what to say initially. So again, shout out to my guy, Dr. Davis. Check out our episode with him. He was spitting facts. I really sat back and wanted to understand what the conversation already was. Because if I sit back and really watch the conversation unfold, I could figure out how I can best contribute to the conversation and how I can contribute to it in a substantive way, rather than just kind of taking up space and just talking just to talk. I
Right.
think a lot of people, and I've listened to a lot of podcasts in preparation. I'm a researcher. I had to do research to feel comfortable sitting down and talk to it. And listening to other podcasts, listening to radio shows, looking at Twitter searches, rewatching the special. I watched it twice and I've read articles. I feel now at least fairly comfortable kind of talking about this. And it might not be popular, but I do think that there are two takeaways, or two major takes, more than two takeaways, but two major takes from this special for me. And it is that Dave Chappelle did something fairly well, but in major ways he also missed. So I need y'all to know that it isn't black or white, and I can't take one side or the other. That I think it has to be a shade of gray. And I think that both can be true. I think a lot of the times people think it's one or the other, but I think a lot of the time it's both and. And I know that we all often have polar like opinions, but I don't think that for me that's true. So I do think that one thing about Dave Chappelle is that we can't take it away from him, and I won't ever let anyone take it away from him. I think Dave Chappelle is brilliant. I think he's smarter than a lot of people give him credit for, and I think a lot of his content goes over listeners' heads, and that's
Yeah.
for good and for bad, right? And I don't think that, but that doesn't mean that he's right all the time either, right? Like, he can be smart and he can be wrong, and he was majorly wrong on some things. But I also read this article that made me feel a bit better talking about this stuff, and it was by Helen Lewis, and it's on The Atlantic. It's called Dave Chappelle, Rorschach test. I think that's how you say it. But I think I want to jump into my big misses real quick. I think we have to acknowledge the first big miss was the team turf thing, and saying that gender is a fact. Gender, my friends, I'm sorry, it is not a fact. It is not a fact. Sex may be. Your biological sex is there. There is male and female, but gender is not that. Those two be kind of whooping y'all, and I need y'all to know that those two things are separate.
And see, just real quick too, like even with the sex, people, let's just so y'all know, there are some people who are literally born with a penis and a vagina,
Yeah,
and the doctor makes that decision at birth. So
absolutely.
even like so it's not even some people don't even get that type of option. Like, you think it's a boy, you think it's a girl. No, literally it was both. They were
Yeah,
both at one
yeah,
point, right? So like it's so complicated even from birth, and people, I don't think people even realize those little tidbits, but definitely not that gender. But go ahead, T. I just wanted to say that.
absolutely. And I want to throw it to my guy Michael. Michael, the student, was on our
Hey,
podcast. Michael Anderson was on our podcast at some point. Please follow him on Twitter and Instagram. He does these beautiful and brilliant things called what is it called? Michael's Classroom or something along those lines. He breaks down a bunch of different concepts, and in this one, he broke down gender, and I feel like he knocked it out the park. So rather than trying to explain it ourselves, we're gonna pass it to an expert. So give me 1 second to pull that up so we can listen to how Michael breaks down gender, and then we can jump off from there.
So, what's gender? Great question. We can think about gender as a set of character traits that people take on. It's a way of thinking and a way of behaving. And in our society, we categorize certain character traits as being more masculine, feminine, or neutral. Over time, the traits that match up with being feminine or masculine have changed because gender is largely a human made-up thing and not something we're born performing. But unfortunately, gender exists inside of a larger thing called patriarchy. Oh, I got you. Kids, patriarchy is a system of domination that believes that men have natural born power and rule over women and society.
Okay. So I think that was a quick crash course on gender. And I think it's important for us to understand that to be a man does not mean to have a penis. And to be a woman does not mean to have a vagina. Because if that's what it meant, like the biggest men would be the biggest men with penises, right? And we know that some men don't really show up in that way, right? So we need to understand like that masculinity and femininity they are social constructions that often shape and change depending on the times. The things that say that you're a real man, they have changed over the past few years, right? They've changed over history. And the same thing with like feminine traits and things that are required to be as women, right? So people self-identify with these things. They see these things in themselves, and they identify with these like labels, and it's a man or a woman. Those are social constructions because as a society we have kind of put it together to what it means to be a man or a woman. So,
absolutely.
well, do you want to jump in?
Oh, I mean, yeah, I think it's obvious that, Dave doesn't have that understanding of what gender is, and that it's more of a roles that people have versus like you being a man or a woman or whatever. But I think here's a concept that David was trying to get at, because he had a story about, talking with this, gay white dude, and he was about to scrap with a gay white dude, and the gay white dude said, started to call the cops, and he was like, a black
Mhm.
gay person wouldn't have done that because da 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 da. So, he said in his special that he was like, if you listen closely enough, you look back at the stories I've told, it's never that I've had a problem with trans people, it's that I've had a problem with white people.
Mhm.
And I can understand, look, I don't care what type of oppression that you're going through, as a white person. You could be gay, you could be a woman, you could be handicapped, you could be whatever. You are still very capable and probably do and have at some point been racist and oppressed racial minority, right? But in that same vein, I think that one of the biggest critiques of Dave is that when he tries to separate people's identities from each other, right?
Yeah.
So he's like, there's the trans community, there's the comedian community, there's the black community. And it's like, Dave, you don't have the power nor the right to try to separate people's identities from themselves.
Absolutely.
When you talk about trans people and their oppression, and you talk about black people and their oppression, like it's an intersectional thing. What about black trans people, Dave? Dave is acting like every part of everyone's identity is super separated. And it's like, yeah, and that's not the case. Mm-hmm. And like, yes, I understand, like white people, no matter what minoritized status they have, they're still capable and every day take an active part in racism. But when you talk about trans people, you got to realize that you're also talking about your own people, Dave. Because that black trans person, that black trans woman who gets killed, she was a black person too. She was a part of your community too, right? So I think I think that's where he messes up the most, when he tries to, say there's the black struggle, and a black, when you're black, you got to deal with X, Y, and Z. And I wish that I had the same rights as these gay folks, but it's like, Dave, as a straight hetero cis black man, do you not understand that, like, yes, you got to worry about police, but you don't got to worry about getting beat up because of your sexuality. You don't have to worry about what you wear when you go out the house. You don't have to worry about being an extra target, not only by white police, but by your other black hetero cis men, because you identify as trans or LGBTQI plus. Like, he is very clear that he doesn't recognize his own privileges even as a black man, because Absolutely. He says, if you're black, you're going through all the oppression, and if you're black, all of us go through the same exact thing. And it's just like, no, he doesn't understand. As a black hetero cis man, you're about as close to the top as a white man as you can actually be. Like, that's the grain. That is the grain, and not because you actually are better than people, but you are perceived and treated as better than people. And I think Dave's comedy sort of lacks that understanding. And who else is supporting him? Other black hetero cis men. You know what I'm saying? Other black hetero cis comedians, rappers. And to be honest, T, I think that as a middle-aged or close to middle-aged man, this is a perspective that a lot of black hetero cis middle-aged men have.
Absolutely.
But and one more thing, because I want to hear more of your thoughts. I think what's the good thing about this, right? Because if people, I would consider myself a trans ally, and I got a lifetime of work to do and improvements to make. But if you're trans, if you support trans people and you never want to rock with Dave Chappelle again, never want to listen to a special, that's fine. The good thing about this special, though, is that I think that it helps people get off the fence. It forces people to get off the fence, because when you support Dave, which you have to admit where you are on that line and spectrum of support for trans people, for LGBTQIA plus folks. Mm-hmm. It was sort of like George Floyd is happening, and it's just like, all right, I'm not a Klansman, but like, I don't think my white kids should be going to that low income black school. Mm-hmm. And I didn't have to really think about that until George Floyd stuff happened, or I didn't have to think about that until Trump happened. Like, this special really makes people have to, I won't say pick a side, but you can't stay as neutral as you once were. Yeah. If you support Dave Chappelle, people are going to think that you support everything he says. Now you have to clarify, like, what things about trans people were you okay with him saying? And you have to think about that now. Mm-hmm. What weren't you okay with him saying? And when you find that out, everybody else finds that out around you. Yeah. And now it's like, you have to draw the line in the sand. And I think that in America, there are so many people who think like Dave, but are too afraid to say it.
Yeah.
And when someone like Dave says it, the only good thing that comes out of it is that everyone now is forced to have these types of conversations that they were trying to keep inside.
Boy, yeah.
Right. And so I think that's one of the most beautiful things about this special. Like America has to have a conversation, and as a country, we're built on a lot of BS. But one good thing that we're about is having these difficult conversations, and maybe not organically, but when someone says the
Stirs
stuff
the
and
pot.
goes right, and goes to the place that Dave goes, now it's impossible not to have a conversation. So those are some of the things that I took away from the special.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, honestly, one thing you just said made me think of something from the special, right? So you were just talking about how like this is kind of similar to George Floyd, right? But I think that this is kind of what Dave Chappelle is getting at, right? Like imagine we're talking about a police officer kneeling on someone's neck until they're dying or till they die. And we're comparing that to how he made people feel with these jokes. And I don't want to diminish it, but I don't know if those two are equal, right? But I think that we are talking about them as if they're equal. And I think that that's one of the things that he did do well. He made us really identify and think about that. And I'm not saying that it's worth all of the shit that he did, but I think that that is one thing, that a silver lining that I do want to draw out of that, because I think that how he opened up, watching it the second time and watching it truly to critique and try to understand, I think it was important for me to just watch it as it flowed. And I saw how he opened up. He opens up by saying, like, this is going to be my last special for a while, and I'm coming with it I'm coming with an objective. And he kind of knew how it was going to go because he knew what he was going to say. And reading through this article, it made me really realize that he was taking shots at everybody from the jump because he wanted to see what people were going to laugh at. So he took shots at COVID. He took shots at Asian people. He took shots at like Israel and Jewish people. And then he follows up by taking a shot at black people. And he talks about Clifford, the big black nigga. And he talks about police brutality and how they show up and shoot him and everybody laughs. He uses that to follow up to the DaBaby thing. I don't truly think that he was caping for DaBaby, even though there was a lot of like things on the shade room, like those little clips, everybody was taking it to say, kind of show that he was supporting DaBaby. But I don't think that was really what he was doing. I think that he was kind of showing that essentially that one will laugh at a joke about like a black man essentially being killed, like in theory, right? But also that we didn't care enough about DaBaby killing this black man, but we did care about what he said about the LGBTQ plus community. And I don't think that either one are right, but I think that one didn't get any acknowledgement. And listening to some podcasts, someone was like, well, we just didn't know, so that's not fair. But I think that that made me really think about, why didn't we know that, right? I think a lot of people found that out then. And I only found that out because around the time that he said this stuff, the cousin of the girl, or the cousin of the guy that got shot, so she was a woman, she was like, well, since we talking about how effed up DaBaby is, let's talk about how he killed my cousin in the Walmart parking lot. And then she goes through and tells the story. She was like, well, since we care about canceling DaBaby now, like, let's really talk about this. So I thought that was super important because it's like, he wanted to show how we are. He wanted to really understand and also show people and show people in kind of these reactions, like what they're willing to react to and how they're willing to react to it and what they'll truly be offended by and what people will truly try to cancel you for. And I thought that that was interesting. I don't know if that was the best take, but I think it was an interesting approach.
Yeah, it's interesting. My only thing with it is that, like, so I had heard about this DaBaby shoot. Well, first of all, he did it in Greensboro, North Carolina, which is like is like where I'm from. So I had heard about it. Now, according to DaBaby, and this is the difference for me. Now, I'm not saying DaBaby was telling the truth here. Maybe he was, maybe he isn't. I know he's not in jail, but you know, that could just be great lawyers. He said he did that in self-defense. Now, that could be BS, but I think that it's also interesting because it's like, even in that vein, to pay attention to that would almost be to like give credence to like, oh, this man, well, like, would that be to give credence to this idea of black on black violence? Because it's like, oh, DaBaby, look at this black on black violence. But it's just like, if the man was defending himself, you know, it is what it is. And I think that what happened was that well, this is how I thought about it in my mind. If the baby was telling the truth, it's like you were defending yourself from harm versus you saying harm and causing harm to someone else, even though it was verbal. Now, I do agree with this idea of like Black people are disposable, but I think even with that, I'm just like, I think America looks at Black people as disposable things. And so when one dies, America doesn't pay attention. They don't respect it, right? But it's just like, you talk, it's like, okay, Dave, but like, my thing is that's a whole separate conversation in and of itself that has nothing to do with like calling someone by their pronouns and some of the stuff that Dave was saying.
Absolutely.
So I'm just like, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I don't want people to take away that I'm caping for Dave.
Oh, no,
I want to pull out all of the things that I got from it. And I think that reading this article in the Atlantic definitely helped me do that. And actually I did skip over the few other things that I felt like he missed in the special. So let me go back. I do think, just like you said, that he had no analysis of intersectionality. He showed that he kind of understood it when he was talking about the big white man that called the police on him. He was like, a Black person would never do that because they understand that we're all Clifford, right? So I think that he scaffolded all of his jokes, but in a lot of the things, just like you said, he didn't have any intersectional analysis. He poses the LGBTQ plus community as white people for the most part. And even feminists, like for the most part, they're identified as white people. And I know people do that with feminists in general, based on their exclusion of Black women throughout history. But I think the LGBT community is a little different in that way. But I do think the biggest problem with this, not only the Black friend trope, because it's like he did that with a trans person. That's what I feel. It's like, oh, I had a trans friend. I think that he kind of into that trope. But I do feel like the worst part about this special is that it empowered people to be transphobic. I don't know. I can't sit here and say that Dave Chappelle is a transphobic person. I can say that some of his remarks were transphobic, but I can say that, like, I think that his comedy was just offensive in general. Like, everything that he said was naturally offensive. So I don't know if I can harp on the fact that he's a transphobe, right? But I can say that the people that I feel like misunderstood some of his comedy and some of the humanizing factors of trans people that he did do in the special with let's not even say people, the humanizing thing that he did with Daphne, his actual friend. I think that people ignored that and used it to be transphobic. So I have a few tweets that I really want to share that I found. And I did this just doing a Twitter search, just kind of looking up Dave Chappelle and seeing what would come up. So I really want to share my screen so y'all can kind of see. Will it show? I think it'll show. Oh God, I don't think it's gonna show. Okay, never mind. I'll just kind of read out some of the different tweets that people were saying. So I see one that says Dave Chappelle can't be canceled. There's another that took the showrunner from Dear White People, who's a white trans woman. They said that this is a woman, this is the woman that's trying to cancel Dave Chappelle, and they zoom in on like her crotch, and they like, oh, this person needs hopes and prayers. People were saying like this is a classic example of people just being offended and don't really want to face the truth of the world. People saying that, oh, people just can't take a joke and you just can't laugh at anything. So I think in the comedy, the special, I think that how I feel as if people didn't understand some of the benefits of the special. I think that they took this to be transphobic, and I think that that's one of the major problems from this special, is more of the response that people like, that it empowered people to do. But I do think that there was a good amount of the comments that were just egregious, and it was extremely offensive. So I think that that's really some of the biggest problems of it.
Yeah. It's like when Trump being Trump, there's an impairment of races, like, and I don't think that was Dave's intentions. I
Mhm.
think that I do agree that he used that trope of this one trans person was laughing at my joke, so they must be awesome. They must be appropriate. And yeah, like I understood what he was going for, and you made a good point about like if I think by the end he was sort of telling you, and I could tell by these stories, most of these people that he interacted with were white, but like
Mhm.
if that's how you feel, Dave, say that shit.
Mhm.
Say white gay people. Say white trans people. Like there is a very, very distinct difference. Like he talked about Caitlyn Jenner being the woman of the year, right?
Mhm.
And he made a joke about it. And he was like, it's not that she's trans. Well, he did sort of make a joke about her being trans because he's like, she's only been a woman for a year.
Mhm.
But for me, I looked at that joke and I was like, you could have been way more specific and been like, Caitlyn Jenner as a Republican and as a white woman who's just never been on the side of anything justice oriented for real. Like she shouldn't have been the woman of the year.
Yeah.
And like I think all of this looks completely different if he racializes it more. If you're
Mhm.
talking like, because maybe you have an agenda with white gay people, but like you can't talk about that whole community because once again, it's just this assumption that it's like black people on one side and trans people on the other side, and
Yeah.
you're not identifying that. No, it's like white trans people with power. Just like you can't say women are doing something. No, white women with power. There's a reason that black people feel a certain type of way, and it goes back to that interaction that you had with that woman, right? An
Mhm.
older white woman. If that was an older black woman, I swear to God, even if she was rude to you, you'd be like, but yikes,
Yeah.
there's just a level I'm not going to go to with you
Mhm.
probably. You know what I'm saying? And I think that
Absolutely.
he could have done a better job because I don't think he's getting dragged in the same exact way. But I think to your point as well, there are people that he emboldened. I just don't think that it was his goal to embolden those people like
Yeah,
it
I
was
agree.
Trump's to
Yeah,
embolden racists.
absolutely.
Like they were a part of his campaign plan. Like it was like, let me
Mhm.
really activate the most
This.
harsh
Yeah.
racist. Whereas with Dave, he's just like, I think that this is how Dave feels, and he's speaking, and he doesn't give a crap what anybody thinks, and it just so happens that other people in their defense of him want to be actively transphobic, and they've been waiting for an excuse. And so like his comments were transphobic. But I think my biggest takeaway is, he touched on some intersectional points, but I feel like he needs to understand the black trans experience just a tad bit more.
Yeah,
You can't,
absolutely.
yes, white people will always call the police on you, no matter what the minoritized status is. Like, it doesn't matter. Anti-blackness is in everywhere and in everyone. But
Absolutely.
like, quit saying you are jealous as a black person of the justice that LGBTQI plus people get, because black trans folks don't get that justice, Dave.
And that's important. And that's important. And if you think so, do you think it would be different if he acknowledged that in his special directly and explicitly?
Like black trans people.
Yeah, like would you feel any different about this special?
I I would feel personally different about it if, because you can't make blanket statements about the blood of trans people being beet juice. Like you
Yeah.
just, and, and for me, I have biases, right?
Mhm.
Because like I said, I think all white people actively contribute to it, and some less than others. But everyone has to passively contribute to white supremacy, but some actively do it unknowingly a lot of times. And so I can understand him being mad at white people. I don't care what their minoritized status is. I don't care if they're old, trans, handicapped. I don't care. I don't care if they're all those combined. They've probably done something that has like hurt a black person. So like, I don't really mind him getting on that, but that's my bias. But you got to be specific.
Yeah.
And I think for me, if he was like, he could have even changed the story. Like, a black gay person wouldn't do that to me because we're both Clifford.
Mm.
A black trans woman probably wouldn't have done that, because hell, they're getting killed by everyone anyway.
Yeah.
Right. Like if you would have said something like, really, y'all, what's the difference between a black trans woman and a black heterosexual man in America? We both getting killed left and right for no reason. You know what I'm saying? Like, I think if he made the connection to the black LGBTQIA community, I think there would be a little bit more support of him. But I think that a lot of people and a lot of the critics that I've seen him, I've seen coming at Dave, it's just like, the ones that are black, I think it looks a little bit different if there's an understanding about black people's specific experience. Not all trans people are going through the same thing. I don't care what anybody says. When you are black, there is another layer of oppression that everybody else contributes to. I don't care if you're white and gay. You've contributed to racism in some way, shape, or form. I stand on that. I don't care. And if Dave had that type of mentality, of course, white gay people would still be upset with him, and it might still be the same result. But black people would understand, oh shit, like he gets that. He gets that trans people aren't a monolith.
Yeah.
He
Absolutely.
gets that us as a people aren't a monolith. That black people are all suffering, and some in different ways than others, and some in more layered ways than others.
Yeah, and I think that that's important. I think that that's really what he was missing in his special. But I do think that a part of his comedy is understanding that it's often a critique of white supremacy, and I think that, and whiteness as a concept. I think that has been a common thread in the specials, and he mentions it multiple times in The Closer. So I do want to go back and watch them all to see what the underlying themes is, because he's saying that there's a theme, and I believe that is that critique of whiteness and white supremacy. But before we transition off of it, I just want to highlight the two things that I felt like I pulled away from it that doesn't make it a completely like terrible thing. I think that there were a few redeeming qualities, and the one was that there was a humanization of trans people that our fellow brothers may not have understood before. That you could build a relationship with a trans person, that you could truly like understand them and value them as a human being. And it was in the statement that you should believe that people are having a human experience. And I think that that's one of the most important things that I pulled away from it, is that, and I think that that's why he doesn't believe that he's transphobic. And I'm not here to say if he's this or that, but I do think that piece is important, because I think that there's enough people in this world, and those people that are emboldened by this special to be transphobic, they don't believe that these people are having a human experience. They believe that they're othered and they shouldn't be there, just like Daphne is no longer here. So I do think that is one thing, and I think that was kind of like one of his final points, and I think that that's what it was kind of building up to. And I think the second thing was, and I'll use the words of Helen from that Atlanta article. She says that this is a brutal indictment of social justice activism on the internet. If Dave Chappelle's comedy is dangerous because it can lead to real world harm, then what the hell is the word for what happened to Daphne Dorman? So we have to consider who the real bully is. And I think that that's important, because I think that it kind of gets at the heart of what I've been seeing in general. And it's like almost how people are bullying people that haven't gotten vaccinated yet. And I'm not talking about the people that are explicitly anti-vax, but I'm talking about the people like almost like Kyrie Irving, right? People are almost bullying Kyrie Irving into getting the vaccination, right? And I think that is, and we think about what happened to Daphne Dorman, and I don't know the whole scope of it, but if we can understand that what Dave did, and through these tweets of these people, he can embody, or he can embolden people to do real harm, we have to think about the real harm that people do to kind of justify their point. I think people have gotten real nasty, and we've talked about this about on social media, how people no longer know how to talk to each other, even if it's a right point. Like, I'm gonna say I'm a commie for the most part. Like, I really believe in like socialism and communism, but I could never just sit there and bully someone until my point and be like, you need to this, that, and the third, right? And I think that is kind of what he's critiquing too, is that like in some way, shape, or form, and I don't know how to describe it just yet, but people have lost this kind of humanity that we have when we're kind of talking with each other that are on different points of views. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't think we should have casual conversations with people that are racist, homophobic, misogynistic, and things like that. But I do think when people aren't seeing eye to eye, I think that we get extremely disrespectful. And I think that that's kind of what I was getting at with the Kyrie Irving thing. Like, he's not even explicitly anti-vax, nor has he said anything about it, but there has been a slew of nasty things said about him. And I think that is my biggest point, is that, like, yeah, maybe he has a bad perspective, but like, we can never convince people because of that incorrigible proposition. So why would we bully them into that, right? Because that does cause real world harm. And I think that is in essence is what that article was getting at. And I would invite everybody to read it. I would invite everybody to kind of do their own research into it. And I think that I think that that's why I don't think that the special should be pulled as a whole. I do think that it is problematic, but I do think that it has some things to offer. But as someone that is not trans, I understand, and I would love to hear a perspective from, especially like, just like you said, a Black trans person about how they feel about this. Because, I'm all open ears, but I think that this was the most that I can get from my research.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I'll say that, like, with Dave, man, I think it's great because of that conversation, the conversations that we're having. And I think that, once again, I learned in a communications class that there are people who are ones, meaning that they're on one side, the extreme side of a conversation. They're not changing their minds.
Mhm.
And then fives are on the other side. And then you have your 2, 3s, and 4s. And I think that it is worth to have the conversation of, like, if someone's a 3 and they come to you and they say, well, what was the issue with Dave? And you say, F you, I can't stand you, you're transphobic forever, get the hell out of my face, go kill
Mhm.
yourself. You know what I'm saying? Like, no pun intended, right? Then when that person either does go and harm themselves, or goes to the other side of really, really being transphobic in actions and thoughts and mindset, then that's something that, as a society, we have to really deal with and handle. So, it's unfortunate, but I think it's a great conversation. I think it gets people off of the fence. And at the same time, it's already sparked a fire. You can't put it out. This is a forest fire. So now, whether it gets canceled or not, it's done its purpose, I think,
Mhm.
to take people off the fence. And so, if
Absolutely.
they cancel it, whatever, I've seen it. I made sure I saw it because I didn't know.
Yeah.
But if it doesn't, people are going to be talking about it probably for weeks and months
Mhm.
ahead. And I think that we need to have an uncomfortable conversation. We have to have someone who
Absolutely.
shakes and rattles things so we can see where we are,
Mhm.
right? We need some ricochets, because we need to. If you got a bag of marbles, you need someone to shake it and let it all out, because guess what? Not all the marbles are going to stay in the same place. But when you have all the marbles in one bag, it all looks organized and clean. But guess what? You scatter that stuff out, you'll see, oh, this ball landed here. This ball landed
Mhm.
here. And there are a lot of different factors that control where that ball lands. So where does yours land? Where does yours land? Y'all